Good morning and welcome back to Storytime Classics Live, produced by Southwest Shakespeare Company. I am your host, Bo Heckman. And today we are continuing with Rebecca, with our guest reader, Amy. Amy, how are you this
Hey.
morning?
I am trying not to get blown over by this wind up here, but I'm great.
It sounds kind of creepy windy there right now.
It is creepy windy. The dogs are less than happy. And as we're reading today, every once in a while you hear this come through. It's very loud.
So we have free sound effects provided by nature.
By Mother Nature. She's
so
doing well
enjoy.
today. But we don't have gardeners. So we'll call that a plus.
That is a plus, but so I like the wind instead. That's great.
Yes, definitely.
So where are we in Rebecca? Where are we in the story?
Well, we are almost halfway through. If you look at that, like we are chugging along. We just met Grandma, and everyone got real sad because Grandma thought that she was Rebecca. Well, Grandma doesn't. We can't tell yet if Grandma doesn't know Rebecca's gone or if she forgot or what. So it was kind of that sad, like meeting an older person who's not 100% there, but you don't know why. So I think it's really interesting if she doesn't know that Rebecca's gone. Adds a little bit of mystery to things. So yeah, but we got sad.
We have some communication this morning from Stanley, of course. Good morning, Bo and Amy. How's everyone today? Doing fine. How are you, Amy?
I'm great. Yes, thank you. I'm good.
Looks like the annual ball will be coming to Manderley soon.
That's right. Stanley remembered more than I did. Yes, there's been an ask for a ball, and now she will be put to the test. Yes.
And we have one from Catherine who says, "Good morning, all. I've got my coffee and my knitting, and I'm ready to listen to another installment of Rebecca." That sounds absolutely lovely, Catherine.
Another yarn crafter. I love it. I crochet myself. So yes, I do the same thing. Listen to books and do my stuff. So yay, Catherine.
Well, spin a yarn for us, and so can Catherine.
Yes.
With that terrible joke, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Fantastic. Terrible jokes. Good morning. All right. So this is the version I am reading. We are on chapter 16. Like I said, almost halfway through. Oh, I'll be sad for it to end, but I'm really excited to see what happens. It was one Sunday, I remember, when we had an invasion of visitors during the afternoon, that the subject of the fancy dress ball was brought up. Frank Crawley had come over to lunch, and we were all three of us looking forward to a peaceful afternoon under the chestnut tree when we heard the fatal sound of a car rounding the sweep of the drive. It was too late to warn Frith. The car itself came upon us standing in the terrace with cushions and papers under our arms. We had come forward and welcomed the unexpected guests. As it often happens in such cases, these were not to be the only visitors. Another car arrived about half an hour afterwards, followed by 3 local people who had walked from Carith. And we found ourselves, with the peace stripped from our day, entertaining group after group of dreary acquaintances, doing the regulation walk of the grounds, the tour of the rose garden, the stroll across the lawns, and the formal inspection of the Happy Valley. They stayed for tea, of course, and instead of a lazy nibbling of cucumber sandwiches under the chestnut tree, we had the paraphernalia of a stiff tea in the drawing room, which I always loathed. Frith in his element, of course, directing Robert with a lift of his eyebrows, and myself rather hot and flustered with a monstrous silver teapot and kettle that I never knew how to manage. I found it very difficult to gauge the exact moment when it became imperative to dilute the tea with boiling water, and more difficult still to concentrate on the small talk that was going on at my side. Frank Crawley was invaluable at a moment like this. He took the cups from me and handed them to people, and when my answers seemed more than usually vague owing to my concentration on the silver teapot, he quietly and unobtrusively put his small wedge into the conversation, relieving me of responsibility. Maxim was always at the other end of the room, showing a book to a bore or pointing out a picture, playing the perfect host in his own inimitable way, and the business of tea was a side issue that did not matter to him. His own cup of tea grew cold, left on a side table behind some flowers, and I, steaming behind my kettle, and Frank, gallantly chugging with scones and angel cake, were left to minister to the common wants of the herd. It was Lady Crowan, a tiresome gushing woman who lived in Carith, who introduced the matter. There was one of those pauses in conversation that happens in every tea party, and I saw Frank's lips about to form the inevitable and idiotic remark about an angel passing overhead, when Lady Crowan, balancing a piece of cake on the edge of her saucer, looked up at Maxim, who happened to be beside her. "Oh, Mr. De Winter," she said, there is something I've been wanting to ask you for ages. Now tell me, is there any chance of you reviving the Manderley fancy dress ball?" She put her head to one side as she spoke, flashing her two prominent teeth in what she supposed was a smile. I lowered my head instantly and became very busy with the emptying of my own teacup, screening myself behind the koozie. It was a moment or two before Maxim replied, and when he did, his voice was quite calm and matter-of-fact. "I haven't thought of it," he said, "and I don't think anyone else has." "Oh, but I assure you we have all thought of it very much," continued Lady Crowan. "It used to make the summer for all of us in this tiny part of the world. You have no idea of the pleasure it used to give. Can't I persuade you to think about it again?" "Well, I don't know," said Maxim dryly. "It was all rather a business to organize. You'd better ask Frank Crawley. He'll have to do it." "Oh, Mr. Crawley, do be on my side," she persisted, and one or two of the others joined in. "It would be a most popular move, you know. We all miss the Manderley gaiety." I heard Frank's quiet voice beside me. "I don't mind organizing the ball if Maxim has no objection to giving it. It's up to him and Mrs. De Winter. It's nothing to do with me." Of course, I was bombarded at once. Lady Crowan moved her chair so that the cozy no longer hid me from view. "Now, Mrs. De Winter, you get round your husband. You are the person he will listen to. He should give the ball in your honor as the bride." "Yes, of course," said somebody else, a man. "We miss the fun of the wedding, you know. It is a shame to deprive us all of excitement. Hands up for the Manderley fancy dress ball. There you see, Mr. De Winter. Carried unanimously." There was much laughter and clapping of hands. Maxim lit a cigarette, and his eyes met mine over the teapot. "What do you think about it?" he said. "I don't know," I said uncertainly. "I don't mind." "Of course she longs to have a ball in her honor," gushed Lady Crowan. "What girl wouldn't? You'd look sweet, Mrs. De Winter, dressed as a little dressin' shepherdess, your hair tucked under a big three-cornered hat." I thought of my clumsy hands and feet and the slope of my shoulders. A fine Dresden shepherdess I would make. What an idiot the woman was. I was not surprised when a nobody agreed with her, and once more I was grateful to Frank for turning the conversation away from me. "As a matter of fact, Maxim, someone was talking about it the other day. I suppose we shall be having some sort of celebration for the bride, shan't we, Mr. Crawley?" he said. "I wish Mr. De Winter would give a ball again. It was rare fun for all of us. It was Tucker at the home farm," he added to Lady Crowan. "Of course they do adore a show of any kind." "I don't know," I told him. "Mr. De Winter hasn't said anything to me." "There you are," said Lady Crowan triumphantly to the drawing room in general. "What did I say? Your own people are asking for a ball. If you don't care for us, surely you care about them." Maxim still watched me doubtfully over the teapot. It occurred to me that perhaps he thought I could not face it, that being shy, as he knew only too well, I should find myself unable to cope. I did not want him to think that. I did not want him to feel I should let him down. "I think it would be rather fun," I said. Maxim turned away, shrugging his shoulders. "That settles it, of course. All right, Frank, you will have to go ahead with the arrangements. Better get Mrs. Danvers to help you. She will remember the form." "The amazing Mrs. Danvers is still with you, then?" said Lady Crowan. "Yes," said Maxim shortly. "Have some more cake, will you? Or have you finished? Then let's all go to the garden." We wandered out to the terrace, everyone discussing the prospect of the ball and suitable dates, and then, greatly to my relief, the car parties decided it was time to take their departure, and the walkers went too, on being offered a lift. I went back into the drawing room and had another cup of tea, which I thoroughly enjoyed now that the burden of entertaining had been taken from me. And Frank came too, and we crumbled up the remains of the scones and ate them, feeling like conspirators. Maxim was throwing sticks for Jasper on the lawn. I wondered if it was the same in every home, this feeling of exuberance when visitors had gone. We did not say anything about the ball for a little while, and then, when I had finished my cup of tea and wiped my sticky fingers on a handkerchief, I said to Frank, "What do you truthfully think about this fancy dress business?" Frank hesitated, half glancing out the window at Maxim on the lawn. "I don't know," he said. "Maxim did not seem to object, did he? I thought he took the suggestion very well." "It was difficult for him to do anything else," I said. "What a tiresome person Lady Crowan is. Do you really believe all the people around here are talking and dreaming of nothing but a fancy dress ball at Manderley?" "I think they would enjoy a show of some sort," said Frank. "We are all very conventional down here, you know, about these things. I don't honestly think Lady Crowan was exaggerating when she said something should be done in your honor. After all, Mrs. De Winter, you are a bride." How pompous and stupid it sounded. I wished Frank would not always be so terribly correct. "I'm not a bride," I said. "I do not even have a proper wedding. No white dress or orange blossoms or trailing bridesmaids. I don't want any silly dance given in my honor." "It's a very fine sight, Manderley en fait," said Frank. "You'll enjoy it, you'll see. You won't have to do anything alarming. You just receive the guests, and there's nothing in that. Perhaps you'll give me a dance?" Dear Frank, I loved his little solemn air of gallantry. "You shall have as many dances as you like," I said. "I shan't dance with anyone except you and Maxim." "Oh, but that would not look right at all," said Frank seriously. "People would be very offended. You must dance with the people who ask you." I turned away to hide my smile. It was a joy to me the way he never knew when his leg had been pulled. "Do you think Lady Crowan's suggestion about the Dresden shepherdess was a good one?" I said slyly. He considered me solemnly without the trace of a smile. "Yes, I do. I think you look very well indeed." I burst into laughter. "Frank, dear, I do love you," I said, and he turned rather pink, a little shocked, I think, on my impulsive words, and a little hurt, too, that I was laughing at him. "I don't see that I have said anything funny," he said stiffly. Maxim came in the window and Jasper dancing at his heels. "What's all the excitement about?" he said. "Frank is being so gallant," I said. "He thinks Lady Crowan's idea of my dressing up as a Dresden shepherdess is nothing to laugh at." "Lady Crowan is a damn nuisance," said Maxim. "If she had to write out all the invitations and organize the affair, she would not be so enthusiastic. It's always been the same, though. The locals look upon Manderley as if it was a pavilion at the end of a pier, and expect us to put up a turn for their benefit. I suppose we shall have to ask the whole county." "I've got the records in my office," said Frank. "It won't really entail too much work. Licking the stamps is the longest job." "We'll give that for you to do," said Maxim, smiling at me. "Oh, we'll do that at the office," said Frank. "Mrs. De Winter need not be bothered in her head about anything at all." I wondered what they would say if I suddenly announced my intention of running the whole affair. Laugh, I suppose, and then begin talking of something else. I was glad, of course, to be relieved of responsibility, but it rather added to my sense of humility to feel that I was not even capable of licking stamps. I thought of the writing desk in the morning room, the docketed pigeonholes all marked in ink by that slanted, pointing hand. "What will you wear?" I said to Maxim. "I never dress up," said Maxim. "It's the one prerequisite allowed to the host, isn't it, Frank?" "I can't really go as a Dresden shepherdess. What on earth shall I do? I'm not much good at dressing up." "Put a ribbon round your hair and be Alice in Wonderland," said Maxim lightly. "You look like it now with your finger in your mouth." "Don't be rude," I said. "I know my hair is straight, but it isn't straight as that. I tell you what, I'll give you and Frank the surprise of your lives. You won't know me." "As long as you don't black your face and pretend to be a monkey, I don't care what you do," said Maxim. "All right, that's a bargain. I'll keep my costume a secret to the last minute, and you won't know anything about it. Come on, Jasper, we don't care what they say, do we?" I heard Maxim laughing as I went into the garden, and he said something to Frank which I could not catch. I wished he would not always treat me as a child, rather spoilt, rather irresponsible, someone to be petted from time to time when the mood came upon him, but more forgotten, more wished something would happen to make me look wiser, more mature. Was it always going to be like this? He always ahead of me with his own moods that I did not share, his secret troubles that I did not know? Would we never be together, he a man and I a woman, standing shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand, with no gulf between us? I did not want to be a child. I wanted to be his wife, his mother. I wanted to be old. I stood in the terrace, biting my nails, looking down towards the sea. And as I stood there, I wonder for the 20th time that day whether it was by Maxim's orders that these rooms on the west wings were kept furnished and untouched. I wondered if he went, as Mrs. Danvers did, and touched the brushes on the dressing table, opened the wardrobe doors, and put his hands amongst the clothes. "Come on, Jasper," I shouted. Run with me. Come on, can't you?" I tore across the grass, savagely, angrily, the bitter tears behind my eyes, with Jasper leaping at my heels and barking hysterically. The news soon spread about the fancy ball. My little maid, Clarice, her eyes shining with excitement, talked of nothing else. I gathered from her that the servants in general were delighted. "Mrs. Frith says it will be like the old times," said Clarice eagerly. "I heard him saying so to Alice in the passage this morning. What will you wear, madam?" "I don't know, Clarice. I can't think," I said. "Mother said I was be sure and tell her," said Clarice. "She remembers the last ball they gave at Manderley, and she has never forgotten it. Will you hire a costumer from London, do you think?" "I haven't made up my mind, Clarice," I said. "But I'll tell you what. When I do decide, I shall tell you and nobody else. It will be a dead secret between us both." "Oh, madam, how exciting," breathed Clarice. "I don't know how I'm going to wait for the day." I was curious to know Mrs. Danvers' reactions to the news. Since that afternoon, I dreaded even the sound of her voice down the house telephone, and by using Robert as mediator between us, I was spared this last ordeal. I could not forget the expression on her face when she left the library after that interview with Maxim. I thank God she hadn't seen me crouching in the gallery. And I wondered, too, if she thought that it was I who told Maxim about Fauvel's visit to the house. If so, she would hate me more than ever. I shuddered now when I remembered the touch of her hand on my arm and that dreadful, soft, intimate pitch of her voice close to my ear. I did not want to remember anything about that afternoon, and that was why I did not speak to her, not even on the house telephone. The preparations went on for the ball. Everything seemed to be done down at the estate office. Maxim and Frank were down there every morning. As Frank had said, I did not have to bother my head about anything. I don't think I licked one stamp. I began to get in a panic about my costume. It seemed so feeble not to be able to think of anything, and I kept remembering all the people who would come from Carith and around the bishop's wife who enjoyed herself so much the last time, Beatrice and Giles, that tiresome Lady Crowan, and many more people I did not know and who had never seen me. They would, every one of them, have some criticism to offer, some curiosity to know what sort of effort I should make. And at last, in desperation, I remember the books that Beatrice had given me for a wedding present, and I sat down in the library one morning, turning over the pages as a last hope, passing from illustration to illustration in sort of a frenzy. Nothing seemed suitable. They were all so elaborate and pretentious. Those gorgeous costumes of velvet and silk and the reproductions given of Rubens, Rembrandt, and others. I got a hold of a piece of paper and a pencil and copied one or two of them, but they did not please me. I threw the sketches into the waste paper basket in disgust, thinking no more about it. In the evening, when I was changing for dinner, there was a knock at my bedroom door. I called, "Come in," thinking it was Clarice. The door opened, and it was not Clarice. It was Mrs. Danvers. She held a piece of paper in her hand. "I hope you will forgive me disturbing you," she said, "but I was not sure whether you meant to throw these drawings away. All the waste paper basket are always brought to me to check at the end of the day in case of mislaying something of value. Robert told me this was thrown into a library basket." I had turned quite cold over at the sight of her, and at first I could not find my voice. She held out the paper for me to see. It was the rough drawing I had done during the morning. "No, Mrs. Danvers," I said after a moment. "It doesn't matter throwing that away. It was only a rough sketch. I don't want it." "Very good," she said. "I thought it better to inquire from you personally and save any misunderstanding." "Yes," I said. "Yes, of course." I thought she would turn and go, but she went on standing there by the door. "So you have not decided yet what you will wear?" she said. There was a hint of derision in her voice, a trace of odd satisfaction. I suppose she had heard of my efforts through Clarice in some way. No, I haven't decided." She continued watching me, her hand on the doorknob. I wonder you don't copy one of the pictures in the gallery, she said. I pretended to file my nails. They were too short and too brittle, but the action gave me something to do, and I did not have to look at her. Yes, I might think about that, I said. I wondered privately why such an idea had never come to me before. It was an obvious and very good solution to my difficulty. I did not want her to know this, though. I went on filing my nails. All the pictures in the gallery would make good costumes, said Mrs. Danvers, especially the one of the young lady in white with her hat in her hand. I wonder Mr. De Winter does not make it a period ball, everyone dressing more or less the same to be in keeping. I never think it looks right to see a clown dancing with a lady in power and patches. Some people enjoy the variety, I said. They think it makes it all the more amusing. I don't like it myself, said Mrs. Danvers. Her voice was surprisingly normal and friendly, and I wondered why she had taken the trouble to come up with my discarded sketch herself. Did she want to be friends with me at last? Or did she realize that it had not been me at all who had told Maxima about Flavel, and this was her way of thanking me for my silence? Has not Mr. De Winter suggested a costume for you? She said. No, I said after a moment's hesitation. No, I want to surprise him and Mr. Crawley. I don't want them to know anything about it. It's not for me to make a suggestion, I know, she said. But when you do decide, I should advise you have your dress made in London. There's no one down here can do that sort of thing well. Vauche on Bond Street is a very good place, I know. I must remember that, I said. Yes, she said. And then, as she opened the door, I should study the pictures in the gallery, madam, if I were you, especially the one I mentioned, and you need not think I will give you away. I won't say a word to anyone. Thank you, Mrs. Danvers, I said. She shut the door very gently behind her. I went on with my dressing, puzzled at her attitude, so different from our last encounter, and wondered whether I had the unpleasant Flavel to thank for it. Rebecca's cousin. Why should Maxim dislike Rebecca's cousin? Why had he forbidden him to come to Manderley? Beatrice had called him a bounder. She had not said much about him, and the more I considered him, the more I agreed with her. Those hot blue eyes, that loose mouth, that careless, familiar laugh. Some people could consider him attractive. Girls in sweet shops giggling behind the counter, and girls who gave one programs in a cinema. I knew how he would look to them, smiling, half whistling a tune under his breath. The sort of look and the type of whistle that would make one feel uncomfortable. I wondered how well he knew Manderley. He seemed quite at home, and Jasper certainly recognized him, but those two facts did not fit in with Maxim's words to Mrs. Danvers, and I could not connect him with my idea of Rebecca. Rebecca, with her beauty, her charm, her breeding. Why did she have a cousin like Jacques Flavel? It was wrong, out of all proportion. I decided he must be the skeleton in the family cupboard, and Rebecca, with her generosity, had taken pity on him from time to time and invited him to Manderley, perhaps when Maxim was away from home, knowing his dislike. There had been some argument about it, probably, Rebecca defending him, and then even after this, perhaps a slight awkwardness whenever his name was mentioned. As I sat down to dinner in the dining room in my accustomed place, with Maxim at the head of the table, I pictured Rebecca sitting where I sat now, picking up her fork and the fish, and then the telephone ringing, and Frith coming into the room and saying, "Mr. Flavel on the phone, madam, wishing to speak with you." And Rebecca would get up from her chair with a quick glance at Maxim, who would not say anything, who would go on eating his fish. And when she came back, having finished her conversation and sat down in her place again, Rebecca would begin talking about something different in a gay, careless way to cover up the little cloud between them. At first, Maxim would be glum, answering in monosyllables, but little by little, she would win his humor back, telling him some story of her day about someone she had seen in Carith. And when they had finished the next course, he would be laughing again, looking at her and smiling, putting out his hand to her across the table. "What the devil are you thinking about?" said Maxim. I started. The color flooded to my face. For that brief moment, 60 seconds in time perhaps, I had so identified myself with Rebecca that my own dull self did not exist, had never come to Manderley. I had gone back in thought and in person to the days that were gone. "Do you know you were going through the most extraordinary antics instead of eating your first?" Your fish, said Maxim. First you listened as though you heard the telephone, and then your lips moved, and you threw a glance at me, and you shook your head and smiled and shrugged your shoulders, all in about a second. Are you practicing your appearance for the fancy dress ball? He looked across at me laughing, and I wondered what he would say if he really knew my thoughts, my heart, and my mind, and that for 1 second he had been the Maxim of another year, and I had been Rebecca. You look like a little criminal, he said. What is it? Nothing, I said quickly. I wasn't doing anything. Tell me what you were thinking. Why should I? You never tell me what you were thinking about. I don't think you've ever asked me, have you? Yes, I did once. I don't remember. We were in the library. Very probably. What did I say? You told me you were wondering who had been chosen to play for Surrey against Middlesex. Maxim laughed again. What a disappointment to you. What did you hope I was thinking? Something very different. What sort of thing? I don't know. No, I don't suppose you do. If I told you I was thinking about Surrey and Middlesex, I was thinking about Surrey and Middlesex. Men are simpler than you imagine, my sweet child. But what goes on in the twisted, tortuous minds of women would baffle anyone. Do you know, you did not look a bit like yourself just now. You had quite a different expression on your face. I did? What sort of expression? I don't know that I can explain. You look older, suddenly, deceitful. It's rather unpleasant. I did not mean to. No, I don't suppose you did. I drank some water, watching him over the rim of my glass. Don't you want me to look older? I said. No. Why not? Because it would not suit you. One day I shall. It can't be helped. I shall have gray hair and lines and things. I don't mind that. What do you mind, then? I don't want you to look like you did just now. You had a twist to your mouth and a flash of knowledge in your eyes, not the right sort of knowledge. I felt very curious, rather excited. What do you mean, Maxim? What isn't the right sort of knowledge? He did not answer for a moment. Frith had come back into the room, was changing the plates. Maxim waited until Frith had gone behind the screen and through the service door before speaking again. When I met you, at first, you had a certain expression on your face, he said slowly, and you have it still. I'm not going to define it. I don't know how to. But it was one of the reasons why I married you. A moment ago, when you were going through this curious little performance, the expression had gone. Something else had taken its place. What sort of thing? Explain to me, Maxim, I said eagerly. He considered me a moment, his eyebrows raised, whistling softly. Listen, my sweet. When you were a little girl, were you ever forbidden to read certain books, and did your father put those books under lock and key? Yes, I said. Well then, a husband is not so different from a father after all. There is a certain type of knowledge I prefer you not to have. It's better left under lock and key. So that's that. Now, eat up your peaches and don't ask me any more questions, or I shall put you in the corner. I wish you would not treat me as if I was 6, I said. How do you want to be treated? Like other men treat their wives. Knock you about, do you mean? Don't be absurd. Why must you make a joke of everything? I'm not joking. I'm very serious. No, you're not. I can tell by your eyes. You're playing me all the time, just as if I was a silly little girl. Alice in Wonderland, that was a good idea of mine. Have you bought your sash and your hair ribbon yet? I warn you, you'll get the surprise of your life when you do see me at my fancy dress. I'm sure I shall. Get on with your peach and don't talk about with your mouth full. I've got a lot of letters to write after dinner. He did not wait for me to finish. He got up and strolled about the room and asked Frith to bring the coffee into the library. I sat still, sullenly, being as slow as I could, hoping to keep things back and irritate him. But Frith took no notice of me and my peach. He brought the coffee at once, and Maxim went off to the library by himself. When I had finished, I went upstairs to the minstrel's gallery to have a look at the pictures. I knew them well, of course, by now, but I never studied them with a view to reproduce one of them as a fancy dress. Mrs. Danvers was right, of course. What an idiot I had been to not think of it before. I always loved the girl in white with a hat in her hand. It was a Rayburn, and the portrait was of Caroline de Winter, a sister of Maxim's great-great-grandfather. She married a great Whig politician, was a famous London beauty for many years, but this portrait was painted before that, when she was still unmarried. The white dress should be easy to copy. Those puffed sleeves, the flounce, and the little bodice. The hats might be rather difficult, and I should have to wear a wig. My straight hair would never curl in that way. Perhaps that Vulture place in London that Mrs. Danvers had told me about would do the whole thing. I would send them a sketch of the portrait and tell them to copy it faithfully, sending my measurements. What a relief it was to decide at last! Quite a weight off my mind. I began almost to look forward to the ball. Perhaps I should enjoy it after all, almost as much as little Clarice. I wrote to the shop in the morning, enclosing a sketch of the portrait, and I had a very favorable reply, full of honor at my esteemed order, and saying the work would be put into hand right away, and they could manage the wig as well. Clarice could hardly contain herself for excitement, and I too began to get party fever as the great day approached. Giles and Beatrice were coming for the night, but nobody else, thank heaven, though a lot of people were expected to dinner first. I had imagined we should have to hold a large house party for the occasion, but Maxim decided against it. Having the dance alone is quite enough effort, he said. And I wondered whether he did it for my sake alone, or whether a large crowd of people really bored him, as he said. I had heard so much of the Manderley parties in the old days, with people sleeping in bathrooms and on sofas because of the squash. And here we were, alone in this vast house, with only Beatrice and Giles to count as guests. The house began to wear a new, expectant air. Men came to lay the floor for dancing in the great hall, and in the drawing room some of the furniture was moved so that the long buffet tables could be placed against the wall. Lights were put up in the terrace, and in the rose garden too. Wherever one walked, there would be a sign of preparation for the ball. Workmen from the estate were everywhere, and Frank came to lunch nearly every day. The servants talked of nothing else, and Frith stalked about as though the whole of the evening would depend on him alone. Robert rather lost his head and kept forgetting things, napkins at lunch and handling the vegetables. He wore a harassed expression, like someone who's got to catch a train. The dogs were miserable. Jasper trailed about the hall with his tail between his legs and nipped every workman in sight. He used to stand on the terrace, barking idiotically, and then dash madly to one corner of the lawn and eat grass in sort of a frenzy. Mrs. Danvers never obtruded herself, but I was aware of her continually. It was her voice I heard in the drawing room when they came to put on the tables. It was she who gave directions for the laying of the floor and the ball. Whenever I came up to the scene, she had always just disappeared. I would catch a glimpse of her skirt brushing the door, or hear the sound of her footsteps on the stairs. I was a lay figure, no use to man or beast. I used to stand about doing nothing except get in the way. "Excuse me, man," I would hear a man say, just as behind me, and he would pass, with a smile of apology, carrying 2 chairs on his back, his face dripping with perspiration. "I'm awfully sorry," I would say, getting quickly to one side, and then as a cover to my idleness, "Can I help you? What about putting those chairs in the library?" The man would look bewildered. "Mrs. Danvers' orders, madam, was that we were to take the chairs around the back, to be put out of the way." "Oh," I said, "yes, of course. How silly of me. Take them around the back, as she said." And I would walk quickly away, murmuring something about finding a piece of paper and a pencil in a vain attempt to delude the man, thinking I was busy, while he went on across the hall looking rather astonished, and I would feel I had not deceived him for a moment. The great day dawned misty and overcast, but the glass was high and we had no fears. The mist was a good sign. It cleared about 11, as Maxim had foretold, and we had a glorious, still summer day without a cloud in the blue sky. All the morning the gardeners were bringing flowers into the house, the last of the white lilac, the great lupins and delphiniums, roses in hundreds, and every sort of lily. Mrs. Danvers showed herself at last. Quietly, calmly, she told the gardeners where to put the flowers, and she herself arranged them, stacking the vases with quick, deft fingers. I watched her in fascination, the way she did vase after vase, carrying them herself through the flower room into the drawing room and the various corners of the house, massing them in just the right numbers and profusion, putting color where color was needed, leaving the walls bare where severity paid. Maxim and I had lunch with Frank at his bachelor establishment next door to the office, to be out of the way. We were all 3 in the rather hearty, cheerful humor of people before a funeral. We made pointless jokes about nothing at all, our minds eternally on the thought for the next few hours. I felt very much the same as I did the morning I was married. the same stifled feeling that I had gone too far now to turn back. That evening had got to be endured. Thank goodness Messrs. Vosh had sent my dress in time. It looked perfect in its fold of tissue paper, and the wig was a triumph. I tried it on after breakfast and was amazed at the transformation. I looked quite attractive, quite different altogether. Not me at all. Someone more interesting, more vivid and alive. Maxim and Frank kept asking me about my costume. You won't know me, I told them. You will both get the shock of your lives. You're not going to dress up as a clown, are you? Said Maxim gloomily. No frightful attempt to be funny? No, nothing like that, I said, full of importance. I wish you had kept to Alice in Wonderland, he said. Or Joan of Arc with your hair, said Frank shyly. Oh, I never thought of that, I said blankly, and Frank went rather pink. I'm sure we shall all like whatever you wear, he said in his most pompous, Frankish voice. Don't encourage her, Frank, said Maxim. She's so full of her precious disguise already, there's no holding her. Bee will put you in your place, that's one comfort. She'll soon tell you if she doesn't like your dress. Dear old Bee always looks just wrong on those occasions, bless her. I remember her once as Madame Pompadour, and she tripped going up to supper, and her wig came adrift. I can't stand this damn thing, she said, in that blunt voice of her, chucked it up on a chair, and went through the rest of the evening with her own cropped hair. You can imagine what it looked like against a pale blue satin crinoline, or whatever the dress was. Poor old Giles did not cope that year. He came as a cook and sat about in the bar all night looking perfectly miserable. I think he felt Bee had let him down. No, it wasn't that, said Frank. He'd lost his front teeth trying out a new mare, don't you remember? And he was so shy about it he wouldn't open his mouth. Oh, was that it? Poor Giles. He generally enjoys dressing up. Beatrice says he loves playing charades, I said. She told me they always have charades at Christmas. I know, said Maxim. That's why I never spend Christmas with her. Have some more asparagus, Mrs. De Winter, and another potato? No, really, Frank, I'm not hungry at all. Thank you. Nerves, said Maxim, shaking his head. Never mind. This time tomorrow it will all be over. I sincerely hope so, said Frank seriously. I was going to give orders that all cars should be standby for 5 a.m. I began to laugh weakly, the tears coming to my eyes. Oh dear, I said. Let's send wires to everyone not to come. Come on, be brave and face it, said Maxim. We need not give another one for years. Frank, I have an uneasy feeling we ought to be going up to the house. What do you think? Frank agreed, and I followed them unwillingly. Uncomfortable, unwilling to leave the cramped, rather uncomfortable little dining room that was so typical of Frank's bachelor establishment, and which seemed to me today the embodiment of peace and quietude. When we came to the house, we found the band had arrived and were standing about in the hall rather pink in the face and self-conscious, while Frith, more important than ever, offered refreshments. The band were to be our guests for the night, and after we had welcomed them and exchanged a few slightly obvious jokes proper to the occasion, the band were borne off to their quarters to be followed by a tour of the grounds. The afternoon dragged like the last hour before a journey when one is packed and keyed up to departure, and I wandered from room to room, almost as lost as Jasper, who trailed reproachfully at my heels. There was nothing I could do to help, and it would have been wiser on my part to have kept clear of the house altogether and taken the dog and myself for a long walk. By the time I decided upon this, it was too late. Maxim and Frank were demanding tea, and when tea was over, Beatrice and Giles arrived. The evening had come upon us all too soon. This is like old times, said Beatrice, kissing Maxim and looking about her. Congratulations to you for remembering every detail. The flowers are exquisite, she added, turning to me. Did you do them? No, I said, rather ashamed. Mrs. Danvers is responsible for everything. Oh, well, after all. Beatrice did not finish her sentence. She accepted the light for her cigarette from Frank, and once it was lit, she appeared to have forgotten what she was going to say. Have you got Mitchells to do the catering as usual? Asked Giles. Yes, said Maxim. I don't think anything has been altered, has it, Frank? We had all the records down at the office. Nothing has been forgotten, and I don't think we've left anything out. What a relief to find only ourselves, said Beatrice. I remember once arriving about this time, and there were about 25 people in the place already, all going to stop the night. What's everyone going to wear? I suppose Maxim, as always, refuses to play. As always, said Maxim. Such a mistake, I think. The whole thing would do well with more swing if you did. Have you ever known a ball at Manderley not to go with a swing? No, my dear boy, the organization is too good. But I do think the host ought to have a lead for himself. I think it's quite enough if the hostess makes the effort, said Maxim. Why should I make myself hot and uncomfortable and a damn fool into the bargain? Oh, but that's absurd. There's no need to look a fool. With your appearance, my dear Maxim, you could get away with any costume. You don't have to worry about your figure like poor Giles. What is Giles going to wear tonight? I asked. Or is it a dead secret? No, rather not, beamed Giles. As a matter of fact, it's a pretty good effort. I got our local tailor to rig it up. I'm coming as Arabian Sheik. Good God, said Maxim. It's not that bad, said Beatrice warmly. He stains his face, of course, and leaves off his glasses. The headdress is authentic. We borrowed it from a friend who used to live in the East, and the rest the tailor copied from some paper. Giles looks very well in it. What are you going to be, Miss Lacey? Said Frank. Oh, I'm afraid I haven't copied much, said Beatrice. I've got some sort of Eastern get-up to go with Giles, but I don't pretend it's genuine. Strings of beads, you know, and a veil over my face. It sounds very nice, I said politely. Oh, it's not bad. Comfortable to wear, that's one blessing. I shall take the veil off if I get too hot. What are you wearing? Don't ask her, said Maxim. She won't tell any of us. There's never been such a secret. I believe she even wrote to London for it. My dear, said Beatrice, rather impressed. You don't say you've gone a bust and will put us all to shame. Mine is only homemade, you know. Don't worry, I said, laughing. It's quite simple, really. Maxim would tease me, and I promised to give him the surprise of his life. Quite right, too, said Giles. Maxim is too superior altogether. The fact is, he's jealous. Wishes he was dressing up like the rest of us and doesn't like to say so. Heaven forbid, said Maxim. What are you doing, Crawley? Asked Giles. Frank looked rather apologetic. I've been so busy, I'm afraid I've left things to the last moment. I hunted up an old pair of trousers last night and a striped jersey football jersey, and thought of putting a patch over one eye and coming as a pirate. Why on earth didn't you write us and let us bring you a costume, said Beatrice. There's one of a Dutchman that Roger had last winter in Switzerland. It would have suited you exactly. I refuse to allow my agent to walk around as a Dutchman, said Maxim. He'd never get rents out of anybody again. Let him stick to his pirate. He might frighten some of them. Oh, sorry, something on the comment just popped up. That is really not appropriate. We're just going to avoid it. We're going to ignore it. I refuse to allow my agent to walk around as a Dutchman, said Maxim. He'll never get rents out of anybody again. Let him stick to his pirate. It might frighten some of them. Anything less like a pirate, murmured Beatrice in my ear. I pretended not to hear. Poor Frank. She was always rather down on him. How long will it take me to paint my face? Asked Giles. 2 hours at least, said Beatrice. I should be thinking about it if I were you. How many shall we be at dinner? 16, said Maxim, counting ourselves. No strangers, you know them all. I'm beginning to get dress fever already, said Beatrice. What fun it all is. I'm so glad you decided to do this again, Maxim. You got her to thank for it, said Maxim, nodding at me. Oh, it's not true, I said. It was all the fault of Lady Crowan. Nonsense, said Maxim, smiling at me. You know you're as excited as a child at its first party. I am not. I'm longing to see your dress, said Beatrice. It's nothing out of the way. Really, it's not, I insisted. Mrs. De Winter says we shan't know her, said Frank. Everybody looked at me and smiled. I felt pleased and flushed and rather happy. People were being nice. They were all so friendly, and it was suddenly fun, the thought of the dance and that I was to be the hostess. The dance was being given for me in my honor because I was the bride. I sat on the table in the library, swinging my legs while the rest of them stood around, and I had a longing to go upstairs and put on my dress, try on the wig in front of the looking glass, turn this way and that before the long mirror on the wall. It was new, the sudden, unexpected sensation of being important, of having Giles and Beatrice and Frank and Maxim all looking at me and talking about my dress, all wondering what I was going to wear. I thought of the soft white dress and its folds of tissue paper and how it would hide my flat, dull figure, my rather slooping shoulders. I thought of my own lank hair covered by the sleek and gleaming curls. "What's the time?" I said carelessly, yawning a little, pretending I did not care. "I wonder if we ought to think about going upstairs." As we crossed the great hall on the way to our rooms, I realized for the first time how the house lent itself to the occasion and how beautiful the rooms were looking. Even the drawing room, formal and cold to my consideration when we were alone, was a blaze of color now. Flowers in every corner, red roses and silver bowls on the white cloth of the supper table. The long windows open to the terrace where, as soon as it was dusk, the fairy lights would shine. The band had stacked their instruments ready in the minstrels' gallery above the hall, and the hall itself wore a strange, waiting air. There was a warmth about it I had never known before, due to the night itself, so still and clear, to the flowers beneath the pictures, to our own laughter as we hovered in the wide stone stairs. The old austerity had gone. Manderley had come alive in a fashion I could not have believed possible. It was not the still, quiet Manderley I knew. There was a certain significance about it now that had not been there before, a reckless air, rather triumphant, rather pleasing. It was as if the house remembered other days, long, long ago, when the hall was a banqueting hall indeed, with weapons and tapestry hanging upon the walls, and men sat at a long, narrow table in the center, laughing louder than we laughed now, calling for wine, for song, throwing great pieces of meat upon the flags to the slumbering dogs. Later, in other years, it would still be gay, but with a certain grace and dignity. And Caroline de Winter, whom I shall represent tonight, would walk down the wide stone stairs in her white dress to dance the minuet. I wished we could sweep away the years and see her. I wished we did not have to degrade the house with our modern jig tunes so out of place and unromantic. They would not suit Manderley. I found myself in sudden agreement with Miss Danvers. We should have made it a period ball, not the hodgepodge of humanity it was bound to be, with Giles, poor fellow, well-meaning and hearty in his guise as an Arabian sheik. I found Clarice waiting for me in my bedroom, her round face scarlet with excitement. We giggled at one another like schoolgirls, and I bade her lock my door. There was much sound of tissue paper rustling and mysterious. We spoke to one another softly like conspirators. We walked on tiptoe. I felt like a child again on Christmas Eve. This padding to and fro in my room with bare feet, the little furtive bursts of laughter, the stifled exclamations reminded me of hanging up my stockings long ago. Maxim was safe in his dressing room, and the way, though, was barred against him. Clarice alone was my ally and favored friend. The dress fit perfectly. I stood still, hardly able to restrain my impatience, while Clarice hooked me up with fumbling features. "It's handsome, madam," she kept saying, leaning back on her heels to look at me. "It's a dress fit for the Queen of England." "What about under the left shoulder there?" I said anxiously. "That strap of mine, is it going to show?" "No, madam, nothing shows." "How is it? How do I look?" I did not wait for her to answer. I twisted and turned in front of the mirror. I frowned. I smiled. I felt different already, no longer hampered by my appearance. My own dull personality was submerged at last. "Give me the wig," I said excitedly. "Careful, don't crush it. The curls mustn't be flat. They're supposed to stand out from the face." Clarice stood behind my shoulder. I saw her round face behind mine in the reflection of the looking glass, her eyes shining, her youth a little open. I brushed my own hair sleek behind my ears. I took hold of the soft, gleaming curls with trembling fingers, laughing under my breath, looking up at Clarice. "Oh, Clarice," I said, "what will Mr. De Winter say?" I covered my own mousy hair with the curled wig, trying to hide my triumph, trying to hide my smile. Somebody came and hammered on the door. "Who's there?" I called in panic. "You can't come in." It's me, my dear. Don't alarm yourself, said Beatrice. How far have you got? I want to look at you. Oh, no, you can't come in. I'm not ready. The flustered Clarice stood beside me, her hands full of hairpins, while I took them from her one by one, controlling the curls that fluffed in the box. I'll come down when I'm ready, I called. Go on down, all of you. Don't wait for me. Tell Maxim he can't come in. Maxim's down, she said. He came along to us. He said you were hammered. He said he hammered on your bathroom door and you never answered. Don't be too long, my dear. We are all so intrigued. Are you sure you don't want any help? No, I shouted impatiently, losing my head. Go away. Go on down. Why did she have to come and bother me at this moment? It fussed me. I did not know what I was doing. I jabbed with a hairpin, flattening against a curl. I heard no more from Beatrice. She must have gone along the passage. I wondered if she was happy in her Eastern robes and if Giles had succeeded in painting his face. How absurd it was, the whole thing. Why did we do it, I wonder? Why are we such children? I did not recognize the face that stared at me in the glass. The eyes were larger, surely, the mouth narrower, the skin white and clear. The curls stood away from the head in a little cloud. I watched this self that was not me at all and then smiled. A new, slow smile. Oh, Clarice, I said. Oh, Clarice. I took the skirt of my dress in my hands and curtsied to her, the flounces sweeping the ground. She giggled excitedly, rather embarrassed, flushed though, very pleased. I paraded up and down in front of my glass, watching my reflection. Unlock the door, I said. I'm going down. Run ahead and see if they are there. She obeyed me, still giggling. I lifted my skirts off the ground and followed her along the corridor. She looked back at me and beckoned. They've gone down, she whispered. Mr. De Winter and Major and Mrs. Lacey. Mr. Crawley's just come. They're all standing in the hall. I peered through the archway at the head of the big staircase and looked down at the hall below. Yes, there they were. Giles, in his white Arab dress, laughing loudly, showing the knife at his side. Beatrice, swathed in an extraordinary green garment and hung about the neck with trailing beads. Poor Frank, self-conscious and slightly foolish in his striped jersey and sea boots. Maxim, the only normal one of the party, in his evening clothes. I don't know what she's doing, he said. She's been up in her bedroom for hours. What's the time, Frank? The dinner crowd will be upon us before we know where we are. The band were changed and in the gallery already. One of the men was tuning his fiddle. He played a scale softly and then plucked at a string. The light shone on the picture of Caroline de Winter. Yes, the dress had been copied exactly from my sketch of the portrait. The puffed sleeve, the sash, and the ribbon, the wide floppy hat I held in my hand. And my curls were her curls. They stood out from my face as hers did in the picture. I don't think I have ever felt so excited before, so happy, so proud. I waved my hand at the man with the fiddle and then put my finger to my lips for silence. He smiled and bowed. He came across the gallery to the archway where I stood. Make the drummer announce me, I whispered. Make him beat the drum. You know how they do. And they call out Miss Caroline de Winter. I want to surprise them below. He nodded his head. He understood. My heart fluttered absurdly, and my cheeks were burning. What fun it was. What mad, ridiculous, childish fun. I smiled at Clarice, still crouching in the corridor. I picked up my skirt in my hands. Then the sound of the drum echoed in the great hall, startling for a moment. Who had waited for it, who knew that it would come. I saw them look up, surprised and bewildered from the hall below. Miss Caroline de Winter, shouted the drummer. I came forward to the head of the stairs and stood there, smiling, my hat in my hand like the girl in the picture. I waited for the clapping and the laughter that would follow as I walked slowly down the stairs. Nobody clapped. Nobody moved. They all stared at me like dumb things. Beatrice uttered a little cry and put her hand to her mouth. I went on smiling. I put one hand on the banister. How do you do, Mr. De Winter? I said. Maxim had not moved. He stared up at me, his glass in his hand. There was no color in his face. It was ashen white. I saw Frank go to him as though he would speak, but Maxim shook him off. I hesitated, one foot already on the stairs. Something was wrong. They had not understood. Why was Maxim looking like that? Why did they all stand like dummies, like people in a trance? Then Maxim moved forward to the stairs, his eyes never leaving my face. "What in the hell do you think you are doing?" he said. His eyes blazed in anger. His face was still ashen white. I could not move. I went on standing there, my hand on the banister. "It's the picture," I said, terrified at his eyes, at his voice. It's the picture, the one in the gallery." There was a long silence. We went on staring at each other. Nobody moved in the hall. I swallowed. My hand moved to the throat. "What is it?" I said. "What have I done?" If only they would not stare at me like that with dull, blank faces. If only somebody would say something. When Maxim spoke again, I did not recognize his voice. It was still and quiet, not a voice I knew. "Go and change," he said. "It does not matter what you put on. Find an ordinary evening frock. Anything will do. Go now before anybody comes." I could not speak. I went on staring at him. His eyes were the only living things in the white mask of his face. "What are you doing standing there for?" he said, his voice harsh and queer. "Didn't you hear what I said?" I turned and ran blindly through the archway to the corridors behind. I caught a glimpse of the astonished face of the drummer who had announced me. I brushed past him, stumbling, not looking where I went. Tears blinded my eyes. I did not know what was happening. Clarice had gone. The corridor was deserted. I looked about me, stunned and stupid like a hunted thing. Then I saw that the door leading to the west wing was wide open and that somebody was standing there. It was Mrs. Danvers. I shall never forget the expression on her face, loathsome, triumphant, the face of an exulting devil. She stood there, smiling at me. And then I ran from her, down the long, narrow passage to my own room, tripping, stumbling over the flounces of my dress. There it is. That was a very long chapter. I don't think I will go forward because the next chapter is also very long and I don't want to keep you. But wow! Oh man, I kind of knew Mrs. Danvers was not nice. And again, I apologize for the comments here. I don't know if everyone, but we'll just not worry about it. I know, Catherine. I know. Mrs. Danvers. So now, next time on Thursday, we'll get to know why all of these things. But yeah, I was really I figured something was going to go wrong because she was way too excited. She was way too happy. Yes. So we'll see next week time, we will start on chapter 17 and then I know, right? The wind, yes. When I realized that there was nowhere in the house for me to hide from the wind, I was thinking just have to use it. And it kind of worked for this very, very end. Thank you both. Thank you for everyone watching. And I'll see you next time and we will find out what happens to this world. And we'll find out who Caroline is. Hopefully. Caroline. I've even forgotten. I'm so excited. All right. Have a fantastic day. Be safe out there. And I will see you all next time. Bye.